let us carry on. So we are looking at the similes of the downside of the five sense world. And the idea here is to see kind of how we are imprisoned by that world and how we can find an escape. Get out of prison, find some freedom. This is kind of one of the fundamental prisons in Buddhism, is the five sense world. And sometimes it can seem like such a beautiful world. You can color your cell with many beautiful colors. You can have flowers on the walls. You can make it really be super duper nice. And it seems very attractive until one day you realize, actually, maybe there are some downsides with this. So we had a look at the first simile so far, which is the simile of the dog and the bone. And now we're going to have a look at simile number 2. Are you sure you're ready for all of this? Yeah? Okay. It's kind of scary. The Buddhist attitude is kind of, it's a bit different from most people's attitude. So, all right, I'm glad you are so open to these things. That's wonderful. So, okay, so let us carry on then. So, Majjhima Nikaya 54. Suppose a vulture or a crow or a hawk was to grab a lump of meat and fly away. Other vultures, crows and hawks would keep chasing it, pecking and clawing. What do you think, householder, if that first vulture, crow or hawk doesn't quickly let go of that lump of meat, wouldn't that result in death or death-like suffering for them, or for it, or whatever? For them. Okay, for it. Probably yes. Yes, sir. Yeah, there you are. Good guess. No, I know the suttas very well. I know exactly what's coming, so I'm just tricking you into thinking I'm smarter than I am. Actually, just good memory, that's all. So here we have the idea of a bird that gets hold of a piece of meat. And in the world of birds, pieces of meat are very valuable because usually birds, they have to eat insects and worms and beetles and what have you. So if they get a piece of meat, it's like, yay, piece of meat. Very rare, very difficult. And because it is so rare, this is like the great sensual pleasure, that wonderful relationship or the beautiful thing that you get. Everyone else also wants that partner. Everyone else also wants that piece of meat. So because other birds also want that piece of meat, they go after that first bird, because it's rare. And the world of birds, there is no mercy. There's just one bird attacking another one. You have looked at the animal kingdom carefully? What it looks like is there's no mercy in the animal kingdom. Human beings are kind of really nice compared to most animals. And so they go after it, and then they try to rip that piece of meat out of the beak or out of the claws of that first bird. And if that first bird doesn't let go, then it meets with death or death-like suffering, which I think is better than deadly suffering. I'm not sure what deadly suffering exactly means, but death-like suffering. In other words, suffering that is similar to what you get when you die. That is the simile. And of course the meat here are the things in the sensory world, in the five sense world, because this world is common to us. We compete and we fight over things in the five sense world. This is almost everything we fight over. One of the most important things we fight over is like a partner. People want the same partners, and then we fight over them, we feel jealous, and then we lose them because they go off with someone else, and all of these kind of things. So there's so much trouble in that world of partners and husbands and wives and what have you. But it doesn't stop there. It's also with work. We fight over the same kind of jobs. Everyone wants to get the attention of the boss so they can get a raise. Everyone gets upset if they don't, not really valued. And so we fight over so many things in the world. We fight over the same houses and cars. That's why some houses are really expensive. If you want to get hold of Buckingham Palace, very expensive. Ajahn Brahma often says we should start a monastery. We should kind of buy Buckingham Palace and start a monastery in London. It's a good idea, Big grounds. You can have kind of have cuties in the grounds and things. So So Ajahn Brahm is famous for thinking big. Yes, this is where that thinking big comes from. But we want the same things in the world, and that because we want the same things, we end up, arguing over things. And I'm very happy that the Venerables over here, when we have lunch, it's very civilized, no fighting over lunch. So thank you for that. But often we do, if you see children, there is a piece of cake, they might fight over that or argue over it, we do argue over these things. And so this is a constant source of competition, a constant source of arguments, because the world outside is what we have in common. And so what this means, because we have a commonality, we have so many things in common, it means that conflict is a given in our society. We cannot have a society without conflict, because once you have a sense of self, it means you want to be an owner of things. We all want to own things. Is there anyone here who doesn't want to own anything? If so, if you don't want to own anything, then you have no business being here, because you're already finished with the course of Buddhism, so you might as well leave in that case. But everyone wants to own things. That is an extension of our ego. It's an extension of our sense of self. We want to have a house. We want to have relationships. We want to have some kind of security. All this ownership comes ultimately from the sense of self. And so because of that, because we want things in the same world, and we always want more, we never really want less. We are attached to things. If someone else tries to take it away, we get upset. Because of that, it's a given in our world that there will be competition, there will be conflict, there will be wars. Ultimately the war in Ukraine also, or anywhere for that matter, is driven by these same kind of considerations, senses of self, people with too big egos, people who don't really understand what should be prioritized. And so what that means is that the world of the five senses is an inherently violent world full of conflict. It is inherent to that world. We try to create a five-sense world around us which is well-governed, with good governments, with good leaders or whatever. This is what we try to do, but it never really works fully. It always ends up still somehow being conflict. Still we have wars. Still we have the same problems. There is no solution. There is no final way of governing the world. There is no utopia. A lot of the search in human history is for utopias. Like Marxism is a kind of utopia. You create the perfect society and then you can have it ever after. It sounds good on paper, but it doesn't work in reality. Capitalism is maybe depending on how you look at, another kind of utopia, but there is no stable capitalist system that always works. In fact, capitalism is kind of inherently violent because it is all about competition. And as soon as there's competition, there's winners and losers. And when there's winners and losers and there's a sense of self, there is going to be problems. So there is an inherent, almost inbuilt conflict and potential violence in the way we structure our world. And so that is kind of terrible. If the five-sense world is inherently violent, inherently full of conflict, then maybe we should retire from that five-sense world. This means it's yucky in a very deep way. That's kind of what it means. It is very, very unsatisfactory. We can always expect problems down the road. And so then we need to look in another direction. And that other direction, again, just like with the previous simile, is of course the Dhamma. The Dhamma is that alternative way of thinking of things, where you go in, instead of finding happiness without, instead of fighting over and having conflict over the resources on the outside, the world on the outside, we look for happiness within. And when you look for happiness within, because that is personal, it is not something you share with the world outside, there is no conflict when you find happiness inside. And this is the Dhamma. It's about finding happiness in the spiritual path. And that not only does it mean that there is no conflict, because you're not fighting over that, it is a personal happiness. Not only is there no conflict, but actually it breeds harmony. And the reason why it breeds harmony is because you start to realize that your happiness inside depends on how you treat the world outside. If you treat the world outside with kindness, with care, with compassion, you're actually building up your spiritual happiness within. And so your spiritual happiness within depends on non-conflict, non-violence, non-war. It depends on creating a world outside that is harmonious and we're working together. So it leads in the other direction. Instead of leading towards conflict and problems, it actually leads away from that, towards harmony, towards living together, towards mutual appreciation, blending like milk and water. Yeah, like we saw the other day, is a beautiful idea in the suttas. Not blending like water and oil. That's kind of a bad, doesn't really blend. And so this is how then the spiritual path works. Isn't that kind of fascinating? These are kind of, when you start thinking about it, it kind of makes sense. But it takes a Buddha to point it out. It takes the Buddha to really see what is going on. But once the Buddha points it out, it kind of, of course that makes sense. And so these ideas, on the one hand, they are simple. But on the other hand, they go against the grain of how we normally think. Why? Because they go against the sense of self. They go against these very profound tendencies in human beings, and that is why they're hard to see. And yet when you start to open your eyes, actually this is very sensible. So this is the simile of the piece of bird and the piece of meat, and how to think about this in such a way that it leads you on to the spiritual path. You think this is true, or you think it's rubbish, or any? True, right? Yeah, good. I'm glad you agree with me, because I was a bit concerned that I'm the only one who agrees with this and everyone else thinks, who is this idiot sitting up there? So thank you for not thinking that. I'm very, very pleased with that. It is, isn't it? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. So great. So then that means, since we all agree, we can move on to the next one. So let's go on to the next simile here. Actually, have a bit of coffee to allow the simile to sink in first, so we don't... There's always a danger of going too fast. When you do the Dhamma, it takes time for ideas to sink in. It's important to contemplate them. It's important to kind of allow them to grow in your mind, to really feel what it means. And so there's always that danger of going too fast. Very often you just read one word or one sentence or one paragraph and you think about that for an hour, a day, a week maybe, sometimes. And it kind of builds up as a consequence. Okay, let's go on to the next simile. Suppose a person carrying a blazing grass torch was to walk against the wind. What do you think, householder? If that person doesn't quickly let go of that blazing grass torch, wouldn't they burn their hand or arm or other limb, resulting in death and death-like suffering for them? Yes, sir. So, a blazing grass torch, well, that is the objects of the five senses. These are the sensual pleasures of the world. They are like a blazing grass torch. And it's kind of interesting. If you grab hold of these five objects of the five senses, all the beautiful things in the world, you can risk kind of getting the embers coming back and burning you, right? Burning your arm or limb, maybe kind of putting your robes or your t-shirt on fire, and before you know it, you are dead, or you are in serious, very serious suffering because of that. So how can that be the case? What does that actually mean? How can it mean that just grabbing those objects of the five sense world, that causes so much suffering? How does that make sense? And the reason why it makes sense, because the idea of grabbing that torch, as it says here, carrying the blazing grass torch, that is attaching to things. So you're attaching to the things of the five sense world. And when you attach to those things of the five sense world, you know that everything in the world is impermanent. Everything in the world is unreliable. Everything in the world is uncertain. Suddenly you get the phone call that there's fire in the house next door. Yeah, that's kind of scary. Or you hear that someone has broken into your house to steal things, or suddenly something happens, another tsunami comes along and, does its damage, or whatever it is. We know that is impermanent, however that is, or whatever. And of course, if something is impermanent and you grab it, you're going to suffer. This is why it is so difficult when the persons that we really love in this world, our husband or wife, our children, whatever it might be, when they leave us or they die, it is incredibly difficult very often. Often it is so difficult that people go into depression or sadness, or they sometimes even commit suicide because they don't know how to deal with it. And so this is the idea that five sense world, if dealt with in the wrong way, can be incredibly painful, really, really painful. So when you grab that grass torch, carrying it against the wind means you're holding it in the wrong way. We're holding it with a view that this can be kept, this can be held onto. It is not impermanent. Carrying it in a different way, understanding the danger, you're carrying it with the wind, so that when the wind comes, the embers go away from you rather than hitting you. So when we deal with things in the five sense world, we should carry it in the right way, with minimum attachment, not really understanding that these things are impermanent, that they are unreliable and uncertain, so we don't attach too much. That is kind of the idea here. And then when the wind comes, it won't burn you as much as it otherwise would. That is kind of the idea behind this. And this is my interpretation anyway. This is just my interpretations of these similes. And if you think that there are other interpretations, or you think I am wrong or whatever, you are very welcome to to bring things up if you wish. So blazing grass torch is here the objects of the five senses. It's important to remember, I should have said this initially, that when we talk about sensual pleasures, it means two different things. It means the pleasures that we derive from the five senses, but it also means the objects of the five senses. So here, the blazing grass torch are the objects of the five senses. Yeah, we grab them, whatever we experience in that world, and that is the issue at stake here. Yeah. Okay, now comes a really fun one after this one. And this is, so no need to read it, so I'll read it out for you. You've probably read it already, but I'll read it anyway. So here we go. So this is the next one about the objects of the five senses. Suppose there was a pit of glowing coals deeper than a man's height, full of glowing coals that neither flamed nor smoked. Yeah, a pit of glowing coals. They neither flame nor smoke. It means that they are really hot. Yeah, there's no smoke anymore. Everything is burnt up. It's just kind of glowing coals. That's all there's to it. Then a person would come along who wants to live and doesn't want to die, who wants to be happy and recoils from pain. Then two strong men would grab that person by the arms and drag them towards the pit of glowing coals. What do you think, householder? Wouldn't that person writhe and struggle to and fro? Of course. Yes, sir. Why is that? For that person knows, if I fall into that pit of glowing coals, that would result in my death, or death-like pain or suffering. This is kind of extraordinary, right? And this is almost hard, for most people, very hard to understand what is going on here. What do you mean, a pit of glowing coals? Yeah, my brand new BMW is at a pit of glowing coals. You must be joking. That's impossible. It's a nice car. What about my beautiful relationships? Are they pits of glowing coals? What is it supposed to mean? And so this is kind of where you start to see that the way the Buddha thinks about the world is very fundamentally different from often how we think about the world. Ordinary, regular people think about the world. So to understand how the objects of the senses can be a pit of glowing coals, you have to kind of think deeper about this. And in fact, this is explained elsewhere in the sutta as exactly what is meant by this. And it's explained in a sutta called the Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 75, 21 suttas further down the track. And in that sutta, the Buddha uses this same simile here. And he's speaking to a wanderer called Magandhya. Magandhya is a wanderer who enjoys sensual pleasures. So in India, they had all kinds of wanderers in those days. It kind of sounds like an anti-wanderer, but anti-monastic, but actually they had kind of wanderers who enjoyed these things. And for them, that was kind of nibbana, enjoying sensual pleasures. The body is happy and well or whatever. And so then the Buddha tries to explain to him why the sensual pleasures of the world are problematic. And he says to him, well, suppose there was a leper. You know the idea of leprosy, right? So it's a kind of very kind of difficult illness, and it's very itchy and all these kind of things, and very unpleasant. And today, still, there are places in the world where there are lepers. Not so many, but they exist in India and a few other places. And so he says to Magandhya, says, well, that leper who has leprosy, he will often go to a fire. He will go to a charcoal pit, just like this one here. And he will put his limbs over the charcoal pit and burn his limbs. Cauterize, I think, is the word that is used, fancy word used by Bhikkhu Bodhi, which basically means burning to stop the infection or something like that. And then why does he do that? Well, the reason why he does that is because the pain and the itchiness of that leprosy is so terrible that it feels pleasurable to burn your limbs over that charcoal pit, because it gets rid of some of the itchiness. It's like, wow, finally get rid of the itchiness. Then you feel better as a consequence. And then the Buddha says to this man, Magandhya, he says, well, if that leper then goes to a doctor and the doctor fixes him up, he doesn't have the leprosy anymore, would he still go to that charcoal pit and burn his limbs? No, exactly. Absolutely not. He wouldn't do that. And then he says to Magandhya, well, why not? Why wouldn't he do that? Because the charcoal pit is painful. And then the Buddha says, is it only now that that charcoal pit was painful? Or was it also painful previously when he was a leper? And then the Magandhya says, well, it was also painful previously, but previously his faculties were so distorted that he wasn't able to experience the pain as pain. And this is the simile the Buddha uses, to explain why things that may seem happy to us actually are painful from the perspective of the Buddha. So the pleasures of the world, the five senses, they seem pleasurable to us. It's just that we are like the leper. We like to burn ourselves. Why? Because our faculties are distorted. We don't see things in the right way. So how can this be? And one of the ways that I like to think about this is like cigarette smoking. So I don't know about you, I never really smoked regularly, but occasionally I would have a cigarette. When I was young, I was kind of trying to be cool, and I would kind of have the occasional cigarette when you try to be cool. You know what it's like when you're young. You have to be cool when you're young, There's no choice in the matter. And so so I remember, and it's terrible. It's like, you just want to cough, right? But you can't cough in front of your friends. You go a bit funny, and you kind of try to be cool. But it's really, really, really painful. But then after a while, this terrible kind of smoke. After a while, you get addicted to the cigarettes, and suddenly you don't really feel the pain of the tar and the smoke anymore. You just feel that incredible relief of that very, very powerful craving, because the craving for nicotine is incredibly powerful. I've seen these surveys done. It's kind of on par with heroin and that kind of stuff. It's very, very profound craving, apparently. And so when you have a cigarette, it's not because the cigarette is nice, but it's because overcoming the craving is so nice. That is what it is about. So you build up this craving, artificial craving, by getting addicted to cigarettes, and then you have more cigarettes so you can overcome that craving that has been artificially built up. You can see how crazy it is, right? It makes no sense at all. You make this craving in the first place, and then you have cigarettes to overcome that craving afterwards. It's kind of, yeah. And this is a sense, this is in a way the way sensual pleasures are. It's that sometimes the craving can be very strong, and especially in regard to things like sexuality, it can be very, very strong cravings. And then but then you overcome it, and then it comes back again, just like cigarettes. And this overcoming the craving is often the main part of the pleasure in these kind of things. And so this is what the Buddha is talking about here. Yeah, but the craving itself. To us, it may seem like the craving is something positive. It may seem like it's nice or whatever, but the craving itself actually is painful. It burns you. It burns the mind. That's why the Buddha calls craving. He calls it a fire. Yeah, the fire of a lobha dosa moha, of desire, of ill will, etc. This is a very challenging simile. And it may be hard for you to kind of make sense of it fully, and maybe you kind of have your doubts whether it should be taken literally or not. Usually the Buddha doesn't exaggerate. Usually the Buddha talks about things the way they are. So I think it should be taken quite literally, but you deal with this in the way you think it should be made sense of. But this is kind of how how the Buddha talks about this. So the simile of the charcoal pit, this is like, So anyway, just to give you some idea of how strong the Buddha sometimes can be in the way he describes these things. Okay, it is already 1:30. Time goes very fast. So let's have a 5-minute break.
I'm going to go first.
Please.
Yeah. So the simile of the blazing grass torch. The blazing grass torch gives us light, so it's kind of helpful.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Being able to utilize, but it's like you walk against the wind. That's the problem here. So it's almost like saying it's the wind of impermanence or something like that.
Yeah.
But then we hold on to it, and if you look at the hawk that sort of holds onto the piece of meat, the more we're being chased by another one, then we would hold on even tighter.
Yeah.
We don't let go when things change. We hold on and grasp even tighter than what we do. What would be the right or the good way to contemplate that we don't actually hold on tighter, but actually release the attachment, because it's kind of hard when you have the change coming and you hold on tighter, and you see death coming and you hold on tighter, because it seems like it's asking to be held on to tighter, even though, and you know that the blazing grass torch is definitely a very useful thing to utilize for anything.
Right. Yeah. So the idea here is simply that these things are to be contemplated, and then there is a kind of reaction in the mind. The reaction in the mind is to loosen your grip a little bit, because you understand the danger of grabbing these things too much, and so you loosen your grip. Loosening your grip means that basically just means that you are not so attached as you used to be. That's really all it means. And so you, when that thing then disappears, you suffer less because your attachment is less, and you have a greater ability to let it go when it is required. So instead of dying, instead of experiencing death-like suffering, you have a little bit of suffering, not a lot of suffering. And eventually down the track, if you are really skillful in the way of dealing with these things, maybe you come to the point when you don't suffer much at all, when these things happen. And so with the blazing grass torch, quite right, it is a useful tool. You need it for seeing. Just like we have to use things in the world to survive, we need food, we need clothes, we need shelter, regardless of how much you give up. You need a basic minimum. And so you use those things that you require As a monastic, you still have robes and a bowl at the very least, and so you use those things in the right way without grasping them too much. And then which in this case means holding the grass torch downwind, still using the light of the grass torch, but making sure the embers don't reach you and you kind of burn up as a consequence, and you have all of these problems. So these things, similes, don't mean that you reject the world of the five senses. It doesn't mean that you throw everything out. It doesn't mean that you become kind of radical and go, way too far, because you need that world of the five senses. You need those objects to some extent. And so what it means you contemplate it. And as you contemplate it, you understand the importance of the spiritual path. Then you build up the spiritual path. And through that contemplation and through the practice of the spiritual path, the grip is naturally loosened on these things. You don't hold on so tight anymore to the things of the world. And you gain more joy and happiness in other places rather than there, which enables you then to loosen things a bit more again. So something like that, I would say. Okay.
Ajahn, you mentioned that the moment we develop a sense of self, we want to own things because it is an extension of our ego.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is the best way for us, the lay people, to develop a sense of anatta? Because we are too much into ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would say that you don't have to worry too much about developing non-self, anatta, because your main job is to live according to the Noble Eightfold Path, which means to live with kindness, with generosity, and these kind of things. And if you develop those qualities sufficiently, anatta comes with those qualities. Why? Because you cannot be too selfish if you cannot break certain precepts. Yeah, you have to kind of live within the bounds of your precepts, live within the bounds of kindness. The sense of ego, sense of self, cannot just go wherever it wants. It is bounded by the precepts, bounded by your commitment to kindness. And so you are actually reducing the sense of self simply by practicing kindness. But we can use the kind of sense, the anatta idea also in the practice, and one of the most important ways of using it is what things I've already been talking about, the idea of how not to get angry in the world, especially with other people. Because if you get angry, usually it is related to other people, right? Usually that's where anger is mostly directed. It can also be directed to other places. That's kind of one of the main areas, one of the most difficult areas. And this is where we start to understand this idea of the simile of the red light. Yeah, the red light goes red, green, bang, according to circuitry. In the same way, people, they get angry according to the circuitry in their mind. Their conditioning, in other words, their background, all of these kind of things. And once you see that people don't get angry because it is about you. It's nothing to do with you. It's about their own inner states. And you happen to be in their presence, at that particular time. So you have to kind of bear what they are doing at that time because of their own inequalities. But it's nothing to do with you. It has to do with them, their inequalities. That's kind of what makes them do stupid things. And so we shouldn't take those things personally. And so what you're doing there, you're using the idea of non-self to look at that person, to see them as a conditioned being rather than as a free individual, autonomous individual who acts independently of the world and decides, I'm going to go after you because I don't like you. That's not how it works. They do things because of their inner conditioning, not because of a sense of self. And once you understand that, you start to see people more like red lights or traffic lights. Yeah, they change. They go from red to green to yellow, whatever. Yeah, and they change. Sometimes they do stupid things. Sometimes they do kind things. And so in that way, it is a use of the non-self idea to understand people in a different way, seeing people as conditioned phenomena in the world rather than as independent agents who decide to go after somebody. I'm going to go after you. Okay, then you might have a reason to kind of be upset. So something like that. That's kind of how I would recommend using the non-self idea. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Ajahn.
Yes.
In this sutta, you mentioned the danger of clinging to the five senses, which I agree. But in the lay life, it's kind of hard to balance clinging to the five senses and not clinging to the five senses.
Yeah.
And it's important to strike a balance. I think how to strike a balance, I think that's a key. I think just give you one example. There's one engineer working in the factory. Boss tell him, how come your product quality is so bad?
Yeah.
Fix it. I think the engineer is enlightened. He told the boss, what goes up will come down.
Yeah.
So I think if the engineer had this kind of attitude as an enlightened being, I think he's not going to survive in the
Yeah.
So how do you balance the two?
Yeah, no, indeed. And I mean, if you work in a factory and you're producing a product, then there is a deal there. There's a deal with you do your best. Otherwise you're not kind of fulfilling your obligation as a worker if you don't do your best to make sure there's a good quality and this kind of things. So there, I would say you do it not so much because of sensuality, but more because you want to do the right thing for the customer. You want to do the right thing for your fellow workers. It's more out of compassion that you do the right thing in that kind of setting. You do things because it is the right thing to do in the world. But in general, you're right. And I think in general, one of the problems is that when people hear these kind of similes, they think it means I have to reject the five-sense world. But actually, that is not the right attitude. The right attitude is I will reflect on these similes, use them as part of my practice of the Noble Eightfold Path as a kind of right effort. Right effort is also about reflection, how we reflect in the right way. And then as you reflect in the right way, the giving up comes naturally. It just happens. You see, okay, these things are dangerous. Why am I holding so much onto this? Let me do these other things instead. And that, so if it comes naturally without force, then actually you don't have to worry too much about it. And it kind of just happens more or less by itself. That's kind of the ideal way, because then the path is easy. If we force it too much, then the path can be very difficult and very problematic.